Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith, and in the last video I told you guys that I'm going to be attending the climate conference COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and it's kind of a last minute decision. I'll be leaving in a couple weeks and attending the full conference, doing a lot of press conferences with the Climate Emergency Forum, and also interviewing as many people as I can. If you go to the COP29 website, which is in the link to this video, have a look at what's going to be going on there. And also, they should be publishing a list, if they haven't already, of all the people attending. And if you see some names of people that you think I might should probably interview there if I get a chance, please suggest that in the comments. There is a blue zone, which you need the badges for, which I've just received badges for both week 1 and week 2, thanks to Heidi and Charles with the Climate Emergency Forum. There's also a green zone and lots of activities going on there. I mean, that's the biggest thing, I think, for me, is making the contacts with people to make my climate work more effective. And a couple other things I wanted to mention is the books. So I just finished reading the climate book by Greta Thunberg just last week, and I'll do a book review video on that. And also, I always have other books on the go. So I just finished reading this book called The Moth and the Mountain. It's a bit of a quirky book about a quirky guy, Maurice Wilson. It's a true story of love, war, and Everest. So this guy had the idea in the 30s to, he was in World War I, wounded, sent home, young man wondering what to do with his life. And he gained this obsession to climb Mount Everest single-handedly, and his plan was to fly a Tiger moth, thus the moth airplane, onto the lower slopes of the mountain and then climb up the rest of the way by himself. And lots of obstacles, and it's a really fascinating read about the drive of a person, and it's actually quite well written. It's a great read. Highly recommend it. Maybe I'll do a book review on it. I don't have to stick to climate change books to do my book reviews. And I'm reading this right now. I think I've mentioned it before. The Blue Machine, How the Ocean Works by Helen Zersky. I mean, it's really fascinating book, which I'll definitely be talking about in a book review. Lots of climate stuff there. But in this video, I want to give you sort of an idea for, the place I'm going to, Baku, Azerbaijan, some of the history. I mean, it's basically an oil city in an oil country. And I'll talk about a little bit about the location and so on, because it's a very, looks like it's going to be an interesting place to visit. And I doubt I would go there otherwise, if there wasn't some climate conference there. So this is the website for COP29, and I'll talk about it probably in more detail in some future videos. But Wikipedia has a good section on the 2024 United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, right? COP 2029. So it's going to be 11th to the 22nd of November, 2024. And so Azerbaijan signed the Paris Agreement, and they talk about some things that have gone on in Baku with student-led NGOs and doing. They have this conference called COP29 to simulate a real United Nations conference. So there are a lot of people in the town that are serious about climate stuff, and it was picked to be hosting the conference. There's information here, good information on they say that the goal is to limit global warming to 1.5. I think that, we've already had a full year of 1.6. This goal is highly questionable. But, we have to stop. We have to halt climate change somewhere. I mean, we're increasing greenhouse gas emissions at ever record levels and temperatures and so on. So there's some background information on the conference here. Baku is an interesting city. It's the capital city. It's the largest city in Azerbaijan. Also, it's the largest city on the Caspian Sea and in the whole Caucasus region. The interestingly thing about the city is it's 28 meters or 92 feet below sea level. So it's the lowest lying national capital in the world. It's the largest city in the world below sea level. Right? So the Caspian Sea, it's called a sea because it is salty. Its salinity is about 1/3 that of the ocean. It has, the Volga River feeds into it, and there's a couple other rivers, but nothing feeds out of it. It's just the water evaporates. It's salty because of the dissolved minerals, it's as I said, well below sea level. About a quarter of people in Azerbaijan live in the Baku region, the metropolitan area. It's got an interesting history, and it's becoming a venue for major international events, Eurovision Song Contest, European Games, European Grand Prix. There's an international sea trade port, right? Baku is renowned for its harsh winds, quite windy place. So its nickname is the City of Winds. So they're really looking a lot at wind turbine power generation, and they're expanding renewable energies there quite a bit. They can get some solar too, but I think wind is, City of Wind. Sounds like a perfect place to put turbines. Of course, it was, it was part of the Soviet Union before the dissolution. People have been settled there since the Stone Age. There's Bronze Age rock carvings discovered. And it's got an interesting history. And so it goes into that on this page. And some of the, histories and the wars and stuff. Discovery of oil. So the Russians built the first oil distilling factory in Balaksana in 1837. First person to drill oil in Baku was an ethnic Armenian known as the founding father of Baku's oil industry. Digging for oil began in the 1840s. The first oil well was drilled in 1846. So this was long before the oil boom in North America, long before that. The oil was basically easily seen on the ground, and it wasn't very deep. It was easy to extract. So, and then other investors came along. The Nobel brothers in 1873, right? The Nobel Prize comes from these guys, I think. The Rothschilds in 1882. So they called an industrial area of oil refineries sprung up, better known as Blacktown. They called it Blacktown, the neighborhood, right? So it was one of the biggest and first oil cities in the world. So at the beginning of the 20th century, so early 1901, 1902, etc., half of the oil sold in international markets was extracted in Baku. Right, so, it's a perfect place for a climate conference, right? And of course, the Soviets, the Red Army invaded Baku, installed the Bolsheviks in 1920. The city had many roles in Soviet life. It was the major oil city of the Soviet Union, the first major oil city. And one of the major trade fairs of the Soviet Union, right? Of course, when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, it restructured, and so it's right on the Caspian Sea. There's mud volcanoes, which are very interesting phenomena. Mostly, there's a lot of methane that is actually bubbling up, and other gases producing the volcano-like features in the mud. And I should actually pay attention to what the temperatures are going to be. So November, daily maximums 13.5 Celsius, daily mean 11.2, minimums 8.8. So it's not as cold as I thought. And there's a lot of information on it. One of the things that I knew about the city beforehand is, and I don't know a lot about it, but some of the famous people there in the city, I think it's at the bottom here. So Lev Landau is in Landau and Lifshitz, famous physicist. Some AI people. Founder of the Soviet space program was born there. Garry Kasparov, there you go, chess grandmaster, former world chess championship from Baku. I'll have to try to find the house where he was born. I don't, if they made a memorial plaque or something there. Okay, so anyway, lots of information. Here's Garry Kasparov, born April 13th, 1963. Born in Baku, Azerbaijan. Right? Strongest chess player in history, basically. Although some would argue that Magnus Carlsen has become as good or better than Kasparov. Born in Baku, Azerbaijan. So the Salt Lake, the Caspian Sea, is a very interesting body of water. Like a salt lake or a saline lake, it's a landlocked body of water. The concentration of salts, sodium chloride, and other dissolved minerals is higher than most lakes, so it's not fresh water. It's often defined as at least 3 grams of salt per liter of water. Salt lakes, in some cases, salt lakes have a higher concentration of salt than seawater. These lakes would be called hypersaline lakes and may also be pink lakes on account of the color, with the salts. Okay, so there's different salinities of lakes and different classifications, right? From freshwater to, this is parts per thousand, right? So the ocean is 35 parts per thousand, or 3.5% on average salinity, but it varies a lot. If you go up into the Baltic Sea, I think it's about only about 8 parts per thousand salinity. Like I said, this lake, Caspian Sea, is about 1.2 or 12 parts per thousand, 1.2%. If you go to the Mediterranean, it's very, very salty. It's more like up here. It's in 40s or something, 40s to 50s, because it's sort of enclosed. There's lots of evaporation, and then you can go all the way down to fresh water, basically. Okay, so there's different properties of these different lakes, and of course, the more salt there is, the more dense the water is. So people talk about floating in the Dead Sea, for example. And saline lakes are declining worldwide on every continent except Antarctica because of human causes like global warming. It's also damming, diversions, and withdrawals, agricultural irrigation. Right, the Aral Sea, for example, is shrunk 90% in volume, 74% in area, mainly because of water being extracted for irrigation. Right, dry area is getting drier, wet area is getting wetter, so many of the lakes are in trouble. So what is a mud volcano? A mud volcano, or a mud dome, it's a landform created by the eruption of mud or slurries, water and gases. So they're not true igneous volcanoes. They don't produce lava. They're not driven by magma in the earth, deep in the earth. These mud volcanoes range in size from merely 1 to 2 meters high and 1 to 2 meters wide to 700 meters high and 10 kilometers wide. Smaller mud exudations are sometimes referred to as mud pots. So here's some mud volcanoes. I'm sure I'll get to see some. The mud produced is mostly formed as hot water, which has been heated deep beneath the Earth's surface. It mixes and blends with the material, the mineral deposit, so it creates a mud slurry. The material is forced upwards through a geological fault or fissure. So these mud volcanoes are associated with subduction zones. About 1,100 have been identified on or near land. Okay, so it reminds me kind of like the methane sinkholes or blowholes that are found in Siberia, but this is like a different, but it's in mud instead of in harder ground. About 86% of the gas released from these structures is methane, with much less carbon dioxide and nitrogen emitted. The ejected material are most often a slurry of fine solids suspended in water that contain a mixture of salts, acids, and various hydrocarbons. Okay, so this is where hydrate-bearing sediments are often associated with mud volcano activity. So it could be the methane hydrates actually underneath the ground in this region that are pushing up through the mud and causing these mud volcanoes. And methane emissions are pretty high per year from the cumulative result of all these mud volcanoes. So it talks about where they're located around the world. So this is Azerbaijan here. Azerbaijan and its Caspian coastline are home to nearly 400 mud volcanoes, more than half the total throughout all of the continent. So it's a place of mud volcanoes. Most of the mud volcanoes in Azerbaijan are active. Some are protected. In 2001, one mud volcano 15 kilometers, 9 miles from Baku, made world headlines when it started ejecting flames 15 meters high. Well, yeah, that would be something to be concerned about. So the methane coming out, which is 80% of the gas coming out of the mud volcanoes, ignited and produced the flames. So eruptions are driven from a deep mud reservoir connected to the surface even during dormant periods when seeping water shows a deep origin. And they talk about some other eruptions. So on July 4th, 2021, this is a recent one, a mud volcano eruption on Daşları Island in the Caspian Sea near an oil platform off the coast caused a massive explosion and fireball, which was seen across the region, including from the capital, Baku, 74 kilometers to the north. The flames went 500 meters into the air. Okay, so there are some pretty spectacular eruptions with these mud volcanoes. So that's an area of them. Now, there's this place called Neft Daşları. Don't ask me to pronounce it. They call it oil rocks, if you like. So this is an interesting place. This is an industrial settlement. It lies 100 kilometers away from the Azerbaijani capital. It's 55 kilometers from the nearest shore. It's out in the Caspian Sea. It's a full town on the sea. It was the first oil platform in Azerbaijan and the first operating offshore oil platform in the world. Okay, first ever oil platform in the world, right out here. Okay, Neft Daşları. They ended up putting a whole bunch of drilling platforms out there. So it began with a single path out over the water. It grew into a system of paths and platforms built on the backs of ships sunk to serve as a foundation. So it became a functional city, basically, with a population of about 2,000, and it's got over 300 kilometers or 190-mile distance length of streets built on piles of dirt and landfill. So basically it started as an oil platform, the world's first oil platform, and they expanded it and expanded it, and they actually sunk ships and built a whole community, built like an artificial island, if you like, a whole community, which has a population of about 2,000, but has been as high as about 5,000 people. So when did they do this? Well, the first large-scale geological study of the area was just after World War II, 1945 to 48. They discovered oil there in 1949, and they built the first oil platform. They discovered oil 1,100 meters or 3,600 feet beneath the Caspian Sea, so it became the world's first offshore oil platform. And it had all the infrastructure and operated as an oil platform from 1951 on. And then in 1952, they built trestle bridges connecting the artificial islands, like multiple oil platforms. A number of Soviet factories constructed crane assemblies for use there, a crane barge that could carry 100 tons of oil. And they started large-scale construction in 1958. That included 9-story hostels, hotels, cultural palaces, bakery factories, and lemonade workshops. There you go. The mass development continued in the 70s. They built a 5-story dormitory and 2 oil gas compressor stations. They installed a drinking water facility, 2 underwater pipes to an onshore terminal, and they had a flyover for vehicle traffic was created. Not sure what that means. What, a little airport? Anyway, the settlement grew to about 7 hectares or 17 acres in the 60s, with the length of the steel trestle bridges joining the man-made islands exceeding 200 kilometers or 120 miles. Okay, so they produced a huge amount of oil, 170 million tons of oil, 15 billion cubic kilometers of natural gas or methane. And yeah, the population varied from 2,000 to 5,000. So this is a really, this was one of the starts of the oil industry globally. They did in 2008, a Swiss documentary crew filmed La Cité de Pétrole, Oil Rock, City Above the Sea. Released that in 2009. I'd have to watch that. The James Bond film, there was a scene from the movie The World Is Not Enough in 1999 on the platform, and it's in the Guinness Book as the oldest offshore oil platform. So there's a lot of history there. I'm wondering, I don't know if the climate conference people are going to be arranging a tour for attendees of COP29 to this place. I mean, it has a big role in the origins of the fossil fuel industry. And why not? We didn't know how harmful, oil and gas would be. We didn't know it would be changing the climate. Well, I mean, some people did, right? There were scientists back then that said, yes, we're going to change the climate with this. But it was very, just few and far between the people that understood what would happen, and the stuff was, the area was swimming in oil. So, it's not a surprise that this area developed as it did. Okay, so climate change in Azerbaijan, I wanted to have a look at it. The climate of Azerbaijan, 1.3 degrees hotter in 2010. By 2010, that's 1.3 degrees Celsius. The Caspian Sea is shrinking. Over 90% of exports from Azerbaijan are petroleum-based, 7 billion barrels of proven crude oil under the Caspian Sea. The climate's increased by 1.3 degrees. Extreme weather events are increasing. The water level of the Caspian Sea is falling. Remember that the surface of the Caspian Sea already is about 29 meters below sea level. And it's expected to fall significantly over the century. And they talk here. I mean, this is about the climate, and they talk about the climate conference a little bit. They say that a national adaptation plan is hoped to be published at the COP, I guess. They talked about Baku hosting the conference. It's the third oil-producing country in a row to host the climate conference, right? 2 years ago, it was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which I attended. Last year, it was in Dubai, United Arab Emirate, which I didn't attend. And yeah, so there's some interesting stuff there on the climate and environment. Energy, right? 2/3 of energy in Azerbaijan comes from fossil gas, so methane, basically, natural gas, 1/3 from oil. Most electricity is generated by gas-fired power plants. And they mention again the history. In 1847, Azerbaijan became the site of the world's first industrially drilled oil well. By 1899, Azerbaijan produced half of the volume of the world's oil. This has got major historical significance for the fossil fuel industry. They talk about some hydro dams and things, and lots of information on the place and the natural gas and electricity production and stats and so on. The environment, natural protection, there's some mountains, Five Finger Mountain, different state parks and stuff are talked about, national parks, and the orography. Minus 28 meters at the Caspian Sea shoreline, up to 4466 meters at Mount Bazarduzu. And they talk about the geology that gives rise to the oil industry. The Caspian Sea is the largest lake on Earth by both area and volume. It's got a surface area, large surface area, large volume. It's a landlocked, it's called an endorheic body of water, and I'll talk about that a bit more. It's got a maximum depth of just over 1 kilometer deep. It's called a sea because when the Romans discovered it, they tasted the water and found it to be salty. So it's got a salinity of 1.2%. That's about 1/3 the salinity of seawater. Okay, so there's a horse there. It's a mountain step racing and riding horse breed that is it's unique to this region. Okay, it's just this beautiful horse. It's bred primarily in Azerbaijan Shaki region. The breed number is below 1,000. It's threatened with extinction. They're trying to revive this horse. It was a workhorse back in the day. Okay, so it played a significant role in this region of the world. So the Caspian Sea is an endorheic basin. An endorheic basin, it's a drainage basin that normally retains water. It allows there's no outflow from the basin to external bodies of water. There's no rivers leading out from it. There's no lakes connected. There's no ocean connected. The water drainage flows into permanent and seasonal lakes and swamps. So basically evaporation is the only way that water is lost from this lake. So it's called a closed basin, a terminal basin, and internal drainage systems. So so open lakes, surface waters eventually drain into the ocean. So in this case, so the Caspian Sea is the world's largest inland body of water. Okay, so there's different basins of these lakes that have dried out in other places. Like here's one, here's a basin in China that used to be one of these lakes, and the evaporation just took all the water out of it over time. Okay, so they're generally found in desert type regions with not a lot of rainfall, and high temperatures, lots of evaporation. Okay, and they talk about the formation. So here's a list of the endorheic basins. There's a bunch of them across the planet. Here's where we're talking about in this region here. And They're on many different, most different continents and so on. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. This is the Caspian Sea. So it's the world's largest inland body of water. It's often described as the world's largest lake, sometimes referred to as a full-fledged sea. Okay, so the area of the lake is roughly equal to that of the area of Japan. The salinity is 1.2%, or 12 grams per liter. It's about a third of the salinity of average seawater, which is 35 practical salinity units, or 35 grams per liter, or 3.5%. Okay, of course, Kazakhstan is to the northeast, Russia is to the northwest, Azerbaijan is to the southwest, Iran to the south, and Turkmenistan to the southeast. I know very little about this region of the world. The sea stretches 1,200 kilometers from north to south. The average width is 320 kilometers. The surface is, it says here, about 27 meters or 89 feet below sea level. The main freshwater inflow is Europe's longest river, the Volga, through Russia. It enters at the shallow north end of the lake. Two deep basins form its central and southern zones. It's very shallow in the north part. The seabed reaches 1,023 meters below sea level. It's the third lowest natural non-oceanic depression on Earth. So Lake Baikal, the bottom of that lake goes deeper, and Lake Tanganyika also goes deeper. So the Caspian Sea is basically, it's nearly 5 times as big as Lake Superior, for those who live in North America and have some sort of idea of how big Lake Superior is. It's a huge freshwater lake. There's many species in the lake. It's famous for its caviar and the oil industry. Pollution from the oil industry and dams on rivers that drain into it have harmed its ecology. It's predicted, this is interesting, it's predicted that during the 21st century, the depth of the sea will decrease by 9 to 18 meters, 30 to 60 feet, due to global warming and the process of desertification causing an ecocide in the lake. Okay, so yeah, really interesting sort of stats on the lake. And, how sort of the geography of it. So very shallow up here. Here's Baku, quite deep here. The deepest down here. There's 130 rivers inflowing into the Caspian. The Volga is the largest. The Ural River flows in from the north. The Kura River from the west. And numerous islands near the coast, but none in the deeper parts of the sea. Okay, and it talks about the climate and the hydrology. It's got 3.5 times more water by volume as all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined. So there you go. If you take all of the water volume of the Great Lakes of North America, the Caspian Sea has about 3.5 times as much water by volume than all those lakes. Volga's about 80% of the inflow into the lake. There's no natural outflow. The only way water leaves is by evaporation, so it's a closed basin. It's got its own sea level history that's independent of the levels of the world's oceans. And so yeah, it reflects sort of local climates, and it talks about the flora and fauna and mud volcanoes and stuff like that. So some interesting stuff. Here's a place I hope to visit on my trip, the Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences. I'm sure they'll have a presence at the conference. 7,000 people there. It was formerly the Academy of Sciences of the Azerbaijan, well, the Soviet Union originally. Talks about the history of it and so on. Maybe I'll get to go there. And this is about some of the history. There was a Paratetys Sea there, a shallow inland sea covering this area here. And, as continental drift occurred and climate's changed. This is sort of the deep origins of the Caspian Sea and geology of that region. Okay. A couple other things. I might check out, this is on a personal note, I might check out scuba diving. If I like to dive if possible, various places. So diving in the Caspian Sea, there's about 80 wrecks or something. I'm not sure if it's sort of out of diving season, just missing it by a couple of weeks. But there are, there's over 80 shipwrecks at the bottom. So I don't know if there's some interesting diving off close by. Chess is huge there. Chess is one of the most popular sports in Azerbaijan. I'm not surprised, where it's governed by the Azerbaijan Chess Federation. And, of course, it's huge there, being the birthplace of Garry Kasparov, one of the top chess players ever. And there's apparently a giant chess set. I'm sure I'll do some selfies of, maybe I can play some Azerbaijani grandmasters, on this giant chessboard on my trip. So, and so basically, I'm going to go. I'm going to try to accomplish what I can to, do what I always do, which is trying to raise awareness on, how serious climate change is. And, it was a toss-up for going, because there's pros and cons of going, but I think the pros for me, outweigh the cons. And I've got good friends going, and there's lots of people that are going to be there that I've met at previous COPs. And it's one of the ways I make a lot of contacts around the world for various people working on climate. And so we can interview them on Climate Emergency Forum, or, and I can do some, work with these people. Anyway, please consider donating at PayPal to support my research and videos and to help offset some of my costs for going to the COP29. And I want to thank Heidi for just setting up a GoFundMe. If you use GoFundMe in preference to PayPal and things, if you just go on GoFundMe and search for my name and COP29, Heidi just yesterday set up a fundraiser to help me go to the UN Climate Conference. And she breaks down the costs of the airfare and so on to get there, and breaks down the costs for airfare, accommodations, and food, and talks a little bit about some of the things I'll be doing. We have a press conference with Dr. Sean Fitzgerald, who's the director for the Center for Climate Repair at Cambridge University, Professor Hugh Hunt, professor of engineering, dynamics, and vibration at Cambridge, John Liu, ecologist, journalist, ecosystem restoration guy, Herb Simmons, the co-founder of Healthy Planet Action Coalition, as well as climate journalist Nick Breeze and Alex Carlin, and numerous climate activists. So, I'll be doing loads of interviews, one-on-one with people, but also with, Climate Emergency Forum in the press conferences, and also sessions where basically Herb Simmons and I will be interviewing people. So, if you could help by sort of going through the COP29 website, when they have a list of people who have badges for the Blue Zone, I think that'll become publicly on the site. And then, we'll be going through the list to see who, who's there, who I should be contacting. So there's some images. This is me in my office when my plants were healthy. I have to do something about that. It's like a desert in my office, unfortunately, for the plants. I think this was at I'm not sure. I think maybe, depending on my hairline and stuff, I think it was probably, COP25. This was COP25. This is actually a typo here. COP24 was in Madrid, Spain. That's the first COP I attended, and I think this is where it was from. COP25 was the big one in Paris in 2015. And this is a CBC reporter interviewing me. So lots of the world media is there, and I'll be trying to, I'll be very kind of a little bit pushy this time, I think. Going up to people, going out of my, I'm pretty outgoing, I think. Most people think of me as far as climate work goes as a bit of an extrovert. So, I'll be going up to people and talking to them and, asking many different people for interviewing. I mean, one of the interesting things will be to interview some of the media, because the media is there, they interview all kinds of people. And I think going up to them and saying, I'd like to interview about your interviews, right? And I think that might be an interesting thing to do, because most of them won't be used to being in front of the cameras themselves. They're behind the cameras, right? So it kind of, over time, as the conference goes on, they'll have more and more information. So it might be an interesting thing to spend a few days trying to interview as many media people as possible about what they're hearing, what they're finding. Of course, this is my main sidekick, and he's a golden doodle, not a labradoodle, but Newton. So anyway, thanks, Heidi, for putting this together for me. And you can find it just by Googling my name and COP29 and climate conference on GoFundMe, to help defray some of my personal costs, out-of-pocket costs for the conference. So thanks for listening, and bye for now.